Welcome to episode 23 and our second standalone episode of the G2 and 5G. It's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, Senior Analyst responsible for networking infrastructure. And again, this week, Anshel is joining me. We have a great guest today, Peter Linder. He's lead of 5G marketing for Ericsson. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, both of you. Looking forward to the session.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to get started first. I have two topics that I want to discuss with Peter, and so does Anshel, and we'll kind of go in a round robin fashion. My first one, Peter, is 5G use cases. I've done a lot of publishing on Forbes around the application of 5G, given its low latency and high throughput relative to LTE, but would love to hear from your perspective where you see the most impact for 5G.
So when I look at 5G use cases, I try to group them in 6 different categories. The first one is enhanced mobile broadband. It's very much like the evolution of what we're serving to mobile phones. I see that is very much shaped around increasing the video quality that we can get and receive. Also, the ability to stream games to mobile devices, not only to advanced game consoles and powerful desktops. And the third one, the ability to deliver untethered AR and VR. So cutting the wires to compute adjacent to an AR and VR device, having that residing in the edge and going over 5G down to the device. And all these 3 categories requires a little bit more bandwidth, and so it's very difficult to do it with 4G. Mm-hmm. The second category is very much about fixed wireless access and bringing fixed broadband into areas where fiber is not really reaching, either in urban areas where it's perhaps either difficult or too costly, or in rural areas where looking at both finding ways to enhance the rural infrastructure, both for fixed and mobile applications. And I think that one, we started a little bit there with fixed wireless access, and then it's been gradually growing interest. But I think the pandemic has put the spotlight on fixed wireless access with their areas where we need to get broadband quicker than we were planning. So those are the 2 foundational use cases categories. On top of this one, I see one which is broadband IoT and massive IoT, which is essentially can do them with 4G today, where the volumes are picking up first, but that some of these can be enhanced with 5G. And the other 2 is critical IoT and industry automation IoT, essentially use cases that require the more advanced capabilities of 5G, both in terms of speed, latency, and reliability, and essentially getting to the point where the wireless broadband capabilities as if it would have been a wire.
Excellent. Yeah, you touched on rural, and I'm curious. I mean, that's been a big gap, right? And in the U.S., can 5G solve that?
Yeah, I think when I started to talk about this 5G in rural areas, a lot of people feel, oh, we can never get there. 5G is going to be something that's going to increase the divide.
Right.
And I think that the drivers for 5G in rural areas, like market forces, will make sure that 5G gets into the urban areas. We won't forget about that. Sure. So it's a little bit, we have to approach this in a different way. What I often try to get across is that we have to have a strong vision for 5G in rural areas. I often talk about the clever countryside, the sibling to the smart cities. And it's different problems that solve in the rural areas. It's not finding a parking spot in a parking garage and things, applications like that are important. But it's about connecting the rural citizens. It's about connecting the rural businesses, farming, outdoor recreation, green energy production, those kind of things. And also the local community functions like education and remote healthcare, super important. So I think that looking at it from that perspective, I think there is a lot of potential to unlock.
Yeah, I would agree. And, ag tech, I think, is a big opportunity too, applying connectivity to these areas that have been underserved to improve crop yields and increase the overall food supply, right? Not only in the US, but globally.
Yeah. No, but also making sure that the rural economy becomes part of the digital economy going forward. I think that rural areas have been more hit now during the pandemic simply because it was not as big portion of the rural areas. Sure. And I can see a lot of people living, work now, knowing that working from home in a digital way works very good. that, hey, why don't I move to an area where I would like to live? Now I know that I can work in this way.
Right. Yeah.
Makes total sense.
That's awesome. Thanks, Peter. Great insight. So, Anshel, let me toss it to you, and you want to talk about midband with Peter.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to explore or talk about, midband technologies, at least, in the US, because, we in the US are slightly different from the rest of the world, in that rest of the world started with 5G in the midband, while we started in the low and high, and are only now starting to kind of address the midband. So I was kind of curious as to, what your vision is for midband long term, and maybe some technologies are enabling that.
Yeah, so I think that the midband long term, I think if you make a very simple division between the three different types of bands, you can say low band is very much for coverage to get everywhere. Midband is for capacity, especially in urban and suburban environments, also along interstate highways, versus high band, which is very much for creativity, like it's perhaps in specific zones or use places where you can unlock significant values, but not necessarily spreading all over. I think midband, the role that midband has played in the international markets is essentially build out both capacity and coverage really quick. So you have a capacity improvement versus the 4G network that was in place there, and also reusing the 4G grid for the macro grid for building this out. I think, as you pointed on the technology side, there's a lot of interesting technology development that's been with massive MIMO and been pushed to higher levels, and like even pushing it into like a 5 gigabit throughput on a 100 megahertz spectrum, as was proven just recently here. So I think massive MIMO plays a key role, and I also think that it will be a 5G dominated band, because a lot of these ones are new or has barely been used for 4G. So playing a very important role. And I think we're a little bit on the back foot, that the fact that we don't have access to those type of bands.
Okay, yeah, and that makes sense, especially with, T-Mobile only having access to 2.5 right now, and the C-band and all the other auctions are happening. As well as CBRS. So I guess in that case, it sounds pretty promising for the US market to finally fill that hole, because I feel like, the low band has kind of been giving that coverage, like you said, and the high band really offers those multi-gigabit bandwidth numbers that everyone's expecting from a new generation. But mid-band is really what kind of, balances it out in a way that makes it a complete and full 3-layer stack of technology and bands that serve the entire of 5G. So I guess in that case, having those multiple layers benefits, unique use cases like private networks, which leads into Will's next topic.
Nice segue, Anshel. And you also touched on CBRS, and it's exciting. So I kind of call CBRS and OnGo the democratization of licensed spectrum. So before, only operators could bid billions of dollars on those valuable airwaves, and now with CBRS and a shared licensing model, it's providing access to businesses, to schools, to municipalities. So Peter, my question for you: how do you view the private networking opportunity, and how can Ericsson participate in that?
Yeah, so the way I would describe the private networking opportunity is like this is appearing in a number of different places where you see, like in a kind of a use place, like an arena, a warehouse, a manufacturing plant, or some university campus. There's a whole range of different use places where we can see that, hey, with wireless, bumped up wireless capabilities here, we can approach things in a different way. Mm-hmm. So when doing that, I think that we're starting to see that when we talk about the private cellular opportunity, it's something between Wi-Fi that we've had there, but we used it for certain purposes, and it was perhaps not the primary access. Mm-hmm. And it was the cellular that we often saw that, hey, that is something that goes to my phone, and I pay for minutes and buckets buckets of data to it. Mm-hmm. I think that the private cellular opportunity, what I see is emerging, is something that where you're looking at where you want the parts of the cellular DNA associated with some wireless at these locations. So what I mean by that is performance, security, availability, and reliability, that where you see that that is what you need to support certain business critical applications. Then you can come up with a couple of different models of approaching it and saying, hey, there's three key components that I see. It's a spectrum that could be licensed, unlicensed, or shared.
Yeah.
It is the ownership of the devices or the ownership of the network elements that could be owned by the business or owned by a third party. Mm-hmm. And it's the operations of the network at the locations. And that could be combined in a couple of different ways depending on who. It doesn't have to be the same. Like when you're talking about a private network, it doesn't mean that you have to own the spectrum and own the assets and do the operations on your own. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to see a lot of models developing around that. Throwing in network slicing in the mix is something that's coming from the outside. Right. But also looking at it, hey, if we now have a private network here, will we have, is it purely private? Or is it portion of it as private, part of it's public? Because if you're like, take a mine, for example, and say, hey, we didn't have coverage here before, build a private network. Why don't we use it as a public portion as well for some smartphones? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things happening there.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. And, you know, I keep tabs on this and I write about it quite a bit. And, you know, the other, you know, I speak to a lot of journalists, and the other question I get is, you know, hey, is mobile 5G going to kill Wi-Fi? And I always like to reply to that is, you know, I believe they're better together. It's really going to depend on not only the use case and the workflow, but just, you know, propagation and that sort of thing. And the need to, for example, to control tactile operations like robotics and those sorts of things. So Wi-Fi 6 certainly has improved on latency and device support and, you know, and all of that good stuff. But I think it'll be a combination. And to your point, I totally agree. I think the models will be varied. I think some, like the large German automobile manufacturers, they have the wherewithal and the capability and the acumen to probably deploy and manage, you know, these sorts of solutions, like maybe with the Deutsche Telekom. But I think others would seek a managed service as well. So I think it's an exciting opportunity, and it'll be interesting to kind of keep tabs on that. So let's move to Anshel's last topic.
Just one topic before we move to that one. Sure. I think you're onto something here, like when you're sharing it, and in the very simplest form, you can say, hey, there's a battle between 5G and Wi-Fi 6. Yeah. But if you look at the broader perspective, it's most likely 4G for certain things, 5G for other things, and Wi-Fi 6 for other things. And then saying, hey, it's a movement towards a wireless-only environment, where it's a question, okay, which do I need all three, or can I do with two, and doing a combo? Because I think it's hard to see short-term to saying that you put all the chips on just one of these technologies, and it's more kind of a complementary game where wireless is the big movement.
No, very good point, Peter. Awesome. Hey, let's go to Anshel's second topic and our last topic this week. And you want to talk with Peter about mmWave?
Yeah, specifically, I wanted to talk about long reach mmWave because it seems to be kind of something that I think a lot of people didn't really expect. mmWave, you know, as physics have taught us, has limited range due to the shortwave nature of mmWave. But now there are technologies out there that are enabling, you know, multi-mile connections over mmWave. And I was curious to hear as to, you know, what use cases you see being enabled by having the ability to deliver mmWave at, you know, more than a few hundred feet at a time and doing it, you know, in kilometers.
Yeah, you're right. So I think the biggest opportunity with this application is for fixed wireless access, because one of the reasons why when millimeter wave, when as you say that if you put the wall in between the antenna and the device, it started to have impact in the performance and sometimes even taking it out completely. So what we have been doing now when working with extended reach millimeter wave is essentially seeing what can we do to make it make the performance better to enable fixed wireless applications. So in the kind of trials we've done recently showing that a performance of more than 100 megabit per second up to 5 kilometers or 3 miles. So I think there's a divider here between mobile application and fixed wireless application, because you make the job easier for the millimeter waves to reach each other if you're targeting one thing that's fixed here towards one thing that's fixed here. And you can start tuning it a little bit. So I think this extended reach, together with the development that we're seeing right now with self-install devices on terminals from the fixed wireless side, this is opening up new doors and say, hey, this is reaching further than we thought, and we can take out the cost of white glove installations at the customer premises. So I see some of these things right now coming together quite nicely and changing the game a little bit, and the way we think about this is quite attractive. What we now do when we see that when the bar is raised or moved.
Right, and I guess the other question I had was, do you see this being a wireless access for rural areas technology? Because it seems like a lot of the trials that I've seen recently were very focused on rural areas and rural carriers.
Yeah, I see it. I grew up in a small town with 5,000 people and no high school and no traffic lights. So and when you look, but we had a cool thing instead. We had a Formula One racing track, so that was very peculiar from that perspective. But if you look that where the people live in those kind of communities, it's fairly concentrated. So it's not. So I don't necessarily see fixed wireless as or millimeter wave as something that we're going to feed farms that are 3-4 miles spaced apart. But I definitely see it. If you look at I normally divide the rural in 4 different segments. In the middle of towns where you can deploy fiber and perhaps already have done it, that market is gone, so we don't need to worry about that. But the market, the outskirts of town, where the cost is increasing and increasing with where it's challenged to build fiber, there it's interesting. And it's also very interesting technology for towns and villages that are along major highways, where you have access to fiber within a couple of miles perhaps. It's a fairly short reach of fiber that you need to put in, and then you can put in millimeter wave access when in that town or village. And being connected to a big fiber grid. So that's where the 2 applications where I see the biggest potential.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I recently went on a trip out to a rural area and was really impressed with what 600 megahertz was able to do, but I could tell that there was definitely some need for a higher band that would, further saturate outwards to the edge of the town. And it's just interesting because I feel like millimeter wave could also be used as backhaul, multi-point backhaul to kind of improve coverage for other bands, but maybe not necessarily be the primary band that, delivers the coverage.
Yeah, and I think when you get out to these smaller communities that perhaps have been underserved for quite some time with broadband, the kind of energy that there is in those communities, like what if can we get broadband now? It's like, I can go back 15 years when I was marketing DSL, and I was pulled into a Swedish radio channel just live. They just called me on the phone and said, hey, we got a broadband expert from Stockholm here. And people have heard that we had a device that could do 12 lines of DSL, and they call and say, hey, our community is 19 people. Will we be excluded? Do we need to find 5 other guys that so you fill up all the 24, or how are we going to approach it? And it was absolutely amazing to see, and I've seen it over and over the years, like the energy and the desire to really get it. It's so strong. So once we show to them what can be done, I think we will unlock very interesting opportunities.
That's a great way to wrap it up. I think that was a great anecdote. I think we all enjoyed that a lot. And yeah, that kind of wraps up my last topic. And I think I'll take us home.
Take us home.
Our We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us with a specific topic on 5G for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at WillTownTech, and I'm at Anshel. Thanks again to Peter, Linder, and Ericsson for joining our standalone 5G episode. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Likewise.